word. It was a really tough process for him because, you know, Steinbeck is a poet and his language is beautiful on its own, but, you know, it was 12 chapters of beautiful language, so he had to condense that into 2 hours. And so it was a real struggle of how do we keep that? And in the word-for-word company's ears, was always really tricky of like, no, you can't do it like that because we have this methodology down and it's almost religious with us, you know, it's like, nah. And so, and for the people from Cal Shakes, it was like, you know, what? I say the she said? Why can't we just cut that? And having to invest your character's intention into that and not just say, you know, blah, 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 he said, you know, but to invest that with something, to make it theatrical. So everybody had a challenge to bring to it. But it came together in a really interesting way of, you know, this very theatrical hybrid of all of these things.
I mean, did you have the motivation of I mean, you knew when you were going into it, it wasn't going to be word for word, right?
Yeah.
So you knew that was going to happen. I mean, was your motivation at all, because you talk about the kind of religiosity of it, to have a translation be more to the text, or I mean, was that any agenda that you felt maybe underneath had going in that you had to let go of? I mean, I'm just kind of curious because, you know, it's working against your own grain in a way, right? So
Well, we've been doing this now for like 17 years, and so me personally, I was kind of thrilled by the idea of blowing that out a little bit and taking it in a different way and seeing what would happen with that. Other people were a little bit, you know, hanging on to it, but I thought it was really exciting.
It's cool. It's great. Claudia, I'm not going to ask you anything about poetry. Strict instruct. No, I'm kidding. Talk a little bit about, I mean, we're just going to talk about the site-specific, because I know it's so easy to do site-specific work. It tends not to have any sort of complications or challenges. And if you want to just talk a little bit about making the piece in that.
Well, I think, you know, I have never, ever written for the theater before. And I love the theater, and I go to the theater. But I don't think I had any idea. And so coming in and then being put on a project that was site-specific. And not just site-specific, but actually dependent on traffic in New York City and weather, with an amazing amount of technology, because the bus had speakers on the outside and on the top and the front. And so, you know, if it rained, the thing shorted out, and and there would be a road that was always great, and then one day would be full of traffic because this actually happened. Somebody parked the car in the middle of the street and lost the keys. and the bus arrived on that road, which was always fine, except this day, the car was just sitting there. And the guy was sitting in it. And we said, "Where are your keys?" And he said he had to go find them. And so then we were held up for, I think it was like 15, 20 minutes that day. So it had, you know, and there were, I'm thinking now in terms of the number of people involved. There was a videographer, there was a sound person, and then all of the other stage management people. For me, writing to this piece was difficult, and I think it was difficult and brave of Melanie to ask a poet to write for the theater, because I'm so used to working internally. And all of a sudden I had to pay attention to actual bodies in the space. And in fact, Sean Sides was brought in as a second director on the piece, a co-director, because Mel had to manage so many of us that she finally brought in Sean to kind of work on bodies in space, actually, with the actress, and how to get movement into this thing that was moving but also very still. So it was a very, you know, a complicated process. And in a lot of ways, I was on the outside of it, because even though I was writing it, I didn't quite understand all the mechanisms. And so I could watch the difficulties being sort of worked out in between Mel and Sunder.
Yeah, like how do you do previews for a show like that? Do you know what I mean? Right? Like, I mean, I'm just curious, like your test runs and that kind of stuff.
We had test runs.
Yeah.
The initial actress was white, and she was a white woman, and she was a fantastic actress, and she had been on a former Foundry production and Telephone, Birgit, when she got on the bus and we were moving through these streets full of Hispanic and black people and having this white woman talk, it was interesting because in theory when we had done it sort of with just us, it was fine. But when we were on a bus with audience in a pre-run, it became glaringly apparent you couldn't have a white voice talking about minorities inside a bus going through the streets. And that was not something that had occurred to us before. But in live, when it happened, you began to feel like a us and them situation set up immediately. So there were things like that.
Yeah, that's wild, right? I mean, you're in previews and you have the wrong, it's cast wrong.
It was just wrong.
Yeah,
it was wrong. It was a point of view wrongness.
That's great. Lloyd, over the years I've run many a talk back with playwrights, and you actually you brought kids in to give you feedback on the play. I'd love to hear. Most playwrights sort of loathe talkbacks, but kids giving you feedback on your work, that's got to be a particular challenge. So I'd love to hear some more detail about that.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I didn't do it a lot, so I'm actually anxious to do it more. I find that not in a talkback setting, but because there was a situation when we were actually sort of a mixture of kids and adults, and the kids were very shy about sort of talking about what was interesting to them. But immediately after the show, when you would, or when the Ralph Pena, the guy who directed the reading, when he would talk to the kids about what was interesting to them, what excited them, they were very vocal about it, sort of just one-on-one. And that was, it's really, and I just thought it was really exciting, and I was struck by, oftentimes the answers were things that I didn't necessarily expect. I had it in my mind, and I sort of ended up writing a very physical play, in a way too, more physical than I ever have, probably because on some level I was sort of thinking that, play for young audiences, I wanted to be physical, and I just noticed that they would respond a lot to things that were very text-based, and there were some physical things where they, couldn't care less. And so I thought, and it's something that the folks at Children's Theatre Company, Peter Brocious and Alyssa Adams, they're just very smart about, like in our interactions and the way we sort of develop the play, of talking about how they're sort of really the same things, just sort of action, clarity of character, also because the play is sort of an adventure story, just sort of when we're on the journey and when we're not. These just the most simple things are the things that are the things that any audience responds to, regardless of age. So that was, so at a certain point I just sort of had to kind of let go of oh, what do the kids want, or and just think about it as just what does any audience want, I guess. Yeah.
Did it have an impact on how you kind of thought about writing your next play?
Probably, yeah. Probably. I haven't really processed it that much yet, and I guess I'm really not that self-aware. Maybe I try not to. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe intentionally. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it probably.
Just clarity of story, clarity of character. It's interesting. To think about just to say what young audiences want and older, how that works, and where to push that envelope or not seems.
Yeah, watching the young, the spots where the young audiences were bored, the adult audience members were probably bored too. So.
That's great. And so, Aditi, you had the logistical, some real logistical challenges because you had so many collaborators and they weren't all in this country, and there were, I remember running into in an airport, actually. Do you remember that day?
Yeah, I do.
You were going, I don't know what city, and I was going some city, and you had just come back, and I said, do you worry at all that there are too many cooks in this kitchen, because it was so many collaborators? And I just wondered if you where you kind of landed a year later or 2 years later from that airport run-in?
Well, as far as the number of collaborators, it was kind of a great play to be that supported and that surrounded on, because it's one of those complicated, many strands, many threads, a long journey for me play. And I don't want to speak for playwrights, but I don't think it's actually that rare to put your little play in your little suitcase and take it to a lot of different places. Mm-hmm. And what we did, what our idea was to be really purposeful about that and just know in advance when you get to have these opportunities rather than be jockeying for them while you're trying to write your play. And the thing we did, for me, the frustration with my first play was that I'd go somewhere and it was such a complex play, it had so many languages and things, that by the time I explained myself and got everyone on board, we had a reading and I said goodbye. And actual process and progress didn't happen, forward motion didn't happen. So the idea here was we get everyone involved from the start. We all converse from the start. Everyone knows what the play is, what it's about, what the ideas that I'm trying to capture are. And I have my trusty dramaturg with me who can help me make sure that there's always forward motion for each development opportunity. And in that sense, it was awesome. The only time, and we did a little debrief at the Lark after the last step of our process, and I got asked this exact question. The only time where I think I felt like, no, too many voices, was when I wasn't prepared for that particular opportunity. Like, you know, you write a draft and you're like, I need to hear this. And there was at least one stop where I had kind of a half draft, I had like a draft and a half, and I didn't, I mean, people would say, you know, I think that's, I go, I know. And it was, you know, it's a very weird, vulnerable place to be when you're like, I didn't quite get there, and I know I didn't get there, and I know that's a big fat hole, and I know that doesn't work, and you know. And that was the only time where it was a little much, but what we talked about at Lark, in terms of kind of evaluating that process, was the idea of love, the idea of knowing you're gonna have this support throughout. So the question becomes flexibility, because you don't know where you're gonna be in your process in this month of this year when you're gonna get to do this. Mm-hmm. And maybe you just don't need to hear other people that month, or maybe you're desperate for it that month, but you don't know that in advance necessarily. So yeah, it's that, like, how to flex that.
How to flex that with everybody's complicated calendars.
With everyone's
Right.
I mean, it's amazing that I got people's space and attention as much as I did, period, and that we managed to schedule it as much as we did at all. So yeah, no, they're producing theaters, they have their schedules, yeah.
And so, Rajiv, just to ask, you know, specifically, you talked about how you started off at the Lark and then it kind of went, you know, you were in a kind of bare bones frame of mind and you started to think bigger. Specifically, how did the play change as a result of being able to think bigger with, you know, all of the additional support?
Well, I mean, you know, in a number of ways. I mean, first it was just the staging that that Moises was kind of employing and the way we were working with it all. And that was affecting, you know, literally every night, the rewriting of it. And, you know, as I experienced, you know, this process, my rewriting of the play I think became more expansive, and also like what I started to do kind of within the collaboration with the director and the actors was kind of stop having like scene breaks. You know, it used to be just a number of scenes one after the other, and you know, what started happening was that the scenes started kind of like just melding together, and and part of the consequence of that, I think, was also like the play just opening up and becoming a bigger thing, at least from my perspective. And